The obsidian arches of the high synod of Xalanthia rose like the ribs of a dying god, stretching upward into the gloom where the atmospheric shield held back the crushing vacuum of the void. Here, in the heart of the concordat of resonant stars, the silence was not merely an absence of sound, but a physical weight, a pressure that pressed against the sensory organs of the 300 species gathered within the amphitheater. Dust motes, suspended in the anti-gravitational fields that illuminated the central dais, danced like the ghosts of civilizations long turned to ash, a grim reminder of the burden that rested upon the shoulders of those present. The air smelled of ozone, terrified pheromones, and the ancient, metallic scent of fear that transcended biology. It was the smell of a prey species realizing that the predator had not only returned, but had evolved into something beyond comprehension. High Archon Vrex, his chitinous armor polished to a mirrored sheen that reflected the anxieties of the delegates below, gripped the podium with 4 trembling hands. His compound eyes, usually fracturing the world into manageable geometric certainties, now swirled with an uncontrollable chaotic motion, betraying the terror that unspooled in his primary heart. He looked out over the assembly, the gelatinous hydro-engineers of the thalassic drift, the crystalline intellects of the Orodian shard mind, and the towering, furred warriors of the Krell, and saw only the reflection of his own dread. They had all heard the signals. They had all seen the readings that defied the known laws of physics, readings that suggested a force moving through the dark matter currents with the inevitability of entropy itself. It was not an invasion. Invasion implied a contest, a struggle where one side might conceivably prevail. This was an arrival. It was the return of a shadow that the galaxy had collectively agreed to forget, a nightmare purged from the archives of history so thoroughly that only the oldest, most forbidden data spires in the depths of the dead zone held even a whisper of the truth. Vrex cleared his throat, a sound like grinding tectonic plates, and the chamber fell into a deeper, more suffocating stillness. He dared not speak the name. To speak the name was to invite the attention of the void. Instead, he spoke of the memory. "The archives, they weep," Vrex began, his voice amplified by the acoustic resonance of the chamber until it vibrated in the bones of every listener. "We have deluded ourselves for 10,000 cycles. We believed that the great silence was a peace we had earned. We believed that the blackened scars on the outer rim were natural phenomena, the birthing pains of new stars or the death rattles of old ones. But the geometry of the dark sector does not lie. The approach vector is confirmed. The magnitude is confirmed. The silence is confirmed." He paused, allowing the weight of the statement to settle. A ripple of bioluminescent panic flashed through the aquatic delegates, a wave of shifting blues and purples that signaled distress. Vrex continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a funeral dirge. "We erased them from the maps. We erased them from the school texts. We forbade the linguistic algorithms from even processing their syntax. But you cannot erase gravity. You cannot erase the footprint of a Titan." A murmur of dissent rose from the militant faction, led by General Kael'thas of the Krell. Kael'thas stood, his massive frame dominating the sector of the amphitheater assigned to the warcast. His fur was bristling, standing on end in a display of aggression that felt pitifully inadequate against the abstract horror Vrex was describing. "You speak in riddles, Archon," Kael'thas boomed, his voice a thunderclap that momentarily shattered the fragile tension. "If a fleet approaches, we meet it with fire. The Concordat fleet is the apex of martial evolution. We have cracked the enigma of antimatter lances. We have shields that can withstand the tidal shearing of a black hole. Why should we fear ghosts? If they bleed, we will kill them. If they do not bleed, we will shatter them. Who are these erased, ones that make the high synod tremble like hatchlings in a storm?" The arrogance of the question hung in the air, thick and cloying. It was the arrogance of the young, of those who had known only the Pax Galactica, the long summer of peace that had lasted for millennia. They did not remember the winter. They did not remember the time before the silence. Vrex looked at Kael'thas with a mixture of pity and contempt. He tapped a command into the console before him, and the massive holographic projector in the center of the room flared to life. It did not show a tactical map. It did not show a fleet composition. It showed a single static image recovered from a buoy that had been drifting in the void for 11,000 years. The image was grainy, distorted by radiation and the decay of eons, but the subject was unmistakable. It was a planet, or rather it was what remained of a planet. The sphere was shattered, cracked open like an egg, its molten core spilling out into the cold vacuum in a solidified river of magma. But it wasn't just destroyed, it was intricately disassembled. The debris field formed a perfect mathematical sigil, a warning written in the corpses of continents. This, Vrex whispered, was the homeworld of the Ethelgard. You know them as the progenitors, the ones who supposedly ascended to a higher plane of existence. That is the lie we told you. The Ethelgard did not ascend. They were executed. They were a civilization of level 4 capability, masters of star lifting, architects of Dyson swarms, and they were dismantled in a single rotation of their primary star. The hologram shifted, showing another image, then another. A nebula choke point turned into a graveyard of ships so dense it had its own gravity well. A star system where every single planet had been glassed, the surfaces fused into obsidian mirrors that reflected the uncaring starlight. The war that ended the Age of Myths was not a war of conquest, Vrex said, his voice trembling. It was a war of extermination. It was a conflict so brutal, so absolute in its violence, that the galaxy itself seemed to recoil. The species that fought against the Ethelgard, against the consuming swarm of the Ithos, against the terrors we have forgotten, that species did not just win. They annihilated the concept of the enemy. They fought with a ferocity that traumatized the collective consciousness of the galaxy. They weaponized physics. They weaponized empathy. They did things that made the void weep. And when it was over, when the blood was washed from the stars, the survivors, our ancestors, were so terrified of their saviors that they begged them to leave. They begged to forget. And the saviors, they agreed. They erased their own name from our worlds to grant us the peace of ignorance. They are the nameless. They are the ones who walked into the dark so we could live in the light. A silence, absolute and terrifying, descended upon the Synod. The arrogance drained from General Kael'thos' stance. The implication was clear. The monsters who had cracked worlds, who had killed the progenitors, who had saved the galaxy by becoming greater monsters than the threat they faced, they were back. And the Concordat, with its shiny fleets and polite diplomacy, was nothing more than paper before a hurricane. The censor officer, a slender avian creature perched in a high alcove, let out a chittering cry of alarm that sliced through the quiet. Proximity alert, hyperspace rupture detected at the zenith point. It's by the core the energy readings are inverted. They aren't tearing space, they're folding it. They are here. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted from dread to panic, a chaotic swirl of motion as delegates scrambled for data pads, for secure lines, for prayers to gods who had long since gone silent. The holographic display shifted to real-time telemetry. Above the Synod station, space didn't just open, it bruised. The fabric of reality turned a deep, sickly purple, then tore open with a soundlessness that vibrated in the teeth. Out of the wound in the world slid a vessel. It was not the gleaming white ceramic of the Concordat, nor the jagged, aggressive iron of the Krell. It was a monolith of matte gray, absorbing the light of the local star, drinking it in and giving nothing back. It was vast, a cityscape of metal and intention that dwarfed the Synod station, casting a shadow that plunged the entire assembly into twilight. There were no visible weapons ports, no glowing engine nacelles, only a smooth, brutalist hull that looked as if it had been carved from the bedrock of a dead universe. It sat there, motionless, a silent judge hanging in the sky. "Hail them," Vrex ordered, his voice barely a whisper. "On all frequencies, universal peace protocols, surrender protocols, just make them speak." The communications officer, her fingers flying across the haptic interface, broadcast the message, a desperate plea sent out into the void on bands of radiation that spanned the spectrum. "This is the Concordat of resonant stars. We greet you in peace. We acknowledge your arrival. We await your judgment." Minutes stretched into hours. The vessel did not respond. It simply hung there, its gravitational displacement causing the station's artificial gravity to fluctuate, making the delegates nauseous. Then, without warning, the main blast doors of the Synod chamber groaned. They were sealed by triple redundant quantum locks designed to withstand a tactical nuclear breach. But they were not being forced open by explosives. They were being overridden. The codes, ancient and forgotten, rooted in the foundational operating systems of the station's computer core, codes that predated the Concordat itself, were being activated. The massive doors slid apart, with a hiss of escaping hydraulics, revealing the corridor beyond. Fog, thick and cold, rolled into the chamber, clinging to the floor, obscuring the feet of the terrified delegates. Through the mist, a rhythmic sound echoed, clang, clang, clang. It was the sound of magnetic boots striking the deck, a heavy industrial cadence that spoke of discipline and inexorable purpose. A figure emerged from the fog. It was bipedal, encased in armor that looked less like a suit and more like a sarcophagus. The plating was scarred, pitted with the marks of plasma burns, kinetic impacts, and claw rakes from beasts unknown to modern zoology. It was gray, unpainted, utilitarian. The figure held no weapon in its hands, but the way it moved, with a fluid, predatory grace that belied the bulk of the armor, suggested that the creature itself was the weapon. Behind it walked two others, similarly clad, their helmets opaque, faceless, reflective surfaces that showed the Synod their own fear. The lead figure stopped at the base of the central dais. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the ventilation system seemed to have paused their cycling. The figure reached up, hissed releases venting pressurized atmosphere, and removed its helmet. The sound of the seal breaking was the loudest thing in the universe. The helmet was placed under one arm, revealing a face. It was pale, the skin pulled tight over sharp cheekbones, framed by hair that was the color of iron filings. The eyes were the most striking feature, dark, deeper than the void outside, filled with a melancholy so profound it felt like a physical blow. There was no anger in that face, no arrogance, only an infinite, weary sadness. It was a human, the species that had been erased, the species that had been turned into a myth to scare younglings. The human looked up at Vrex, its gaze sweeping over the trembling Archon, then moving to Kael'thas, then to the myriad other species huddled in the dark. When it spoke, it did not use a translator device. It spoke in High Gothic, the dead language of the precursors, the root tongue from which all concordat languages had drifted. The acoustics of the room caught the voice, amplifying its gravelly texture. "We received your signal," the human said. The voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of a collapsing star. "We stayed away as long as we could. We stayed in the dark so you could play in the light, but the cradle is burning and we could not watch you burn with it." Vrex found his voice, though it was thin and reed-like. You are the erasure, the nameless." The human nodded slowly. "We are humanity. We are the janitors of this galaxy. We are the ones who clean up the messes that the universe makes when it dreams of death." The human stepped forward, ascending the first step of the dais. The movement caused the Krell guards to flinch, their weapons raising instinctively. The human didn't even look at them. "Put those away," the human said, not as a command, but as a tired suggestion. "If we wanted you dead, we would have collapsed the star this station orbits 3 days ago. We are not here for war. We are here because the war never ended. You just stopped hearing the gunfire." This was the revelation that shattered the room. The war never ended. The implication hung there, a poisonous cloud. Kael'thas stepped forward, his warrior pride warring with his instinctual fear. "Explain," he demanded, though the word lacked its usual force. "The history crystals say the war ended 10,000 cycles ago. The galaxy wept, and then there was silence, peace, trade, prosperity. Are you saying our history is a lie?" The human, whose name would later be revealed as Commander Elias Thorne, looked at the giant Krell with a sad smile. "Your history is a mercy, General. A bedtime story we wrote for you so you wouldn't die of fright. Do you know why we erased our name? Do you know why we left?" Elias gestured to the massive holographic display above. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small, crystalline drive. He tossed it to Vrex. "Plug it in. Show them the truth. Show them what we have been doing while you argued over trade tariffs and border disputes." Vrex's trembling fingers inserted the drive. The hologram flickered, the image of the shattered Ethelgard world vanishing. In its place, a star chart appeared. It showed the galaxy, but not as the Concordat knew it. The outer rim, the region designated as unexplored space or the dead zone, was lit up with thousands of red markers. A defensive line, a fortress wall made of stars, and beyond that wall, nothing. A void so absolute it defied logic. But as the image zoomed in, the void wasn't empty. It was moving. It was a tide of darkness, a corruption of reality that was slowly, methodically eating the edges of the galaxy. "The enemy," Elias said, his voice echoing in the dead silence, "is not a species. It is not a fleet. It is an ontological failure, a mistake in the code of the universe. We call it the hollow. It consumes matter, energy, consciousness. It turns existence into non-existence. The Ethelgard tried to ascend to escape it. Their ascension tore the fabric of reality and let it in. We didn't kill the Ethelgard because we wanted their land. We killed them to close the door. We burned their worlds to cauterize the wound." A collective gasp went through the room. The genocide of the progenitors, the greatest crime in history, was a surgical amputation to save the patient. "But the wound didn't heal cleanly," Elias continued, turning his back to the hologram to face the crowd. "It infected the rim. For 10,000 years, humanity has stood on the wall. We have built fleets of world ships, huge mobile fortresses that require the resources of entire solar systems to maintain. We have been fighting a retrograde action, holding the line, trading 1 billion human lives for every light year of space we save. We erased our name because we needed resources. We needed to strip mine the outer rim without your interference. We needed you to fear us so you wouldn't come looking, so you wouldn't see the horror we were holding back. We became the monsters so you could remain innocent. The philosophical weight of the confession crushed the assembly. The ethical calculus was staggering. To save a civilization, they had to isolate it, deceive it, and terrify it. They had accepted the role of the villain to be the savior. Vrex looked at the human, seeing the scars, the pallor, the sheer exhaustion etched into his genetic code. These were not conquerors. They were the walking dead. They were soldiers who had been in the trenches for 100 centuries without relief. "Why return now?" Speaker Alara of the Erodian Shardmind asked, her voice a harmonious chime that usually brought calm, but now sounded fragile. "If your strategy was silence, why break it? Why come to the High Synod and reveal this terror?" Elias closed his eyes for a moment, and in that gesture the invincible armor of the HFY archetype cracked, revealing the raw, bleeding humanity beneath. "Because we are failing," he whispered. "The Hollow has adapted. It has learned our tactics. It has learned our logic. We have lost the Perseus arm. 300 billion humans dead in the last 6 months. The wall is breaching. We cannot hold it alone anymore. We ran out of resources. We ran out of ships. We ran out of souls." He opened his eyes, and they burned with a desperate intensity. "We didn't come here to conquer you. We came to beg. We need your fleets. We need your metal. We need your mines. We need you to pick up a rifle and stand on the wall with us. Or the silence you enjoyed for 10 millennia will become the silence of the grave for everyone." The transition from the myth of the monster to the reality of the desperate guardian was a psychological shock that the Synod struggled to process. The arrogance of the aliens, their belief in their own supremacy, crumbled. They realized they were children playing in a sandbox while their parents fought off wolves in the dark. The brutal war that the galaxy wept over was merely the opening skirmish. The real war was happening now. Act 2 began not with a bang, but with a logistical nightmare. The revelation had paralyzed the Concordat. Panic reigned in the streets of the core worlds. But in the High Synod, the initial shock gave way to a frantic, terrified pragmatism. The humans, true to their reputation, did not waste time with comforting lies. They established a forward command center within the Synod station. Their technology was revealed, and it was terrifying. It wasn't elegant like the Concordat's crystalline matrices. It was brutal, efficient, and overpowered. Their engines didn't just push ships, they tortured spacetime until it screamed and yielded. Their weapons didn't just burn, they erased matter on a quantum level. It was technology born of desperation, innovation fueled by the imminent threat of extinction. Diplomacy became a crash course in survival. Vrex found himself working alongside a human admiral named Kavik, a woman whose cybernetic half-face twitched as she processed stream data from the front lines. The cultural clash was immense. The Concordat valued consensus, debate, and aesthetic beauty. The humans valued one thing: efficiency. They repurposed the pleasure yachts of the thalassic drift into medical frigates within days. They stripped the ornamental gold from the Synod's spires to use in conductivity coils for railguns. They were ruthless, not out of malice, but out of necessity. One specific interaction highlighted this divide. General Kael'thas, attempting to assert some authority, challenged the human deployment of the null field generators around the core worlds. "These fields dampen our psychic communications," Kael'thas roared in the war room, slamming a fist onto the table. "You are blinding us. You treat us like resources, not allies." Admiral Kavik didn't even look up from the tactical map. "The Hollow tracks psionic energy, General. Your psychic communications are a beacon dinner bell. We dampen the field, or the Hollow eats your homeworld first. Your choice. Comfort or survival, pick one." The cold logic, the binary choice, silenced the General. It was a recurring theme. The humans were not there to be liked. They were there to ensure survival. They were the ethical pragmatists, willing to sacrifice a limb to save the body, a concept the Concordat, soft from peace, struggled to stomach. Yet amidst the preparation for war, there were moments of profound connection. Speaker Alara found herself fascinated by the human concept of hope. To the Erodian logic minds, the human resistance against a mathematically superior enemy was a glitch, an error in calculation. "The probability of victory is less than 3%, Alara told Elias one evening as they watched the shipyards churning out hulls. "Why do you fight? Why did you not flee to another galaxy?" Elias looked out at the stars, holding a cup of synthetic caffeine, a luxury he seemed to cherish. "Because this is where we live, because fleeing just means dying tired, and because humans don't calculate odds the way you do. We don't fight because we think we will win. We fight because it is the right thing to do. Logic dictates surrender. Humanity dictates defiance. That is our gift to the galaxy, Alara. We are the irrational element. We are the stubbornness that physics cannot account for." This philosophical exchange bridged the gap. Alara realized that humanity's strength wasn't just their big guns or their thick armor. It was their indomitable spirit, their capacity to endure suffering for an abstract ideal. They were the ultimate Stoics, weeping internally while standing like stone externally. The climax of Act 2 came when the Hollow made its first incursion into Concordat space. It didn't attack the front lines where the human fleets were massed. It attacked a sanctuary world, a planet of pacifist scholars, thinking it a soft target. The Concordat fleets froze, terrified by the enemy, shimmering clouds of black geometry that unmade the sky. But the humans did not freeze. A single human dreadnought, the Unto the Breach, jumped into the system. It was outnumbered 1,000 to 1 by the hollow fractals. The ship broadcast a message to the planet below: "Evacuate, we will buy you time." The Unto the Breach didn't fire weapons. It detonated its core. It overloaded its warp drive, creating a localized singularity that swallowed the hollow incursion force and the dreadnought itself. A suicide tactic. A sacrifice of 5,000 humans to save a planet of aliens they had never met. The galaxy watched the footage in stunned silence. The brutal war was suddenly recontextualized. The brutality was self-inflicted. The weeping wasn't for the victims of humanity. It was for the humanity that died to save them. The name of humanity was no longer erased. It was being carved into every heart in the Concordat. Act 3 opened with the Unity. The sacrifice of the Unto the Breach galvanized the Concordat. The fear of the humans evaporated, replaced by a profound, reverent awe. The fleets of the Krell, the science vessels of the Thalassic, the drone swarms of the Orodian, they all integrated into the human command structure. It was no longer an alliance, it was a fusion. The galaxy realized that humanity was the shield and they had to be the sword. But the twist, the dark secret that Elias had hinted at, finally surfaced. As the combined fleets gathered at the galactic core for the final stand against the encroaching Hollow, the High Archon discovered an anomaly in the human navigational data. The Hollow wasn't just an extra-dimensional infection. It was a signal. It was a response. Vrex confronted Elias in the observation deck of the flagship Terra Eterna. "The Hollow, it follows a frequency," Vrex said, his voice trembling with a new kind of fear. "It follows us. It follows high-energy sentient life. The Ethelgard didn't just open a door, they were the door, and so are we. The more we advance, the more we use zero-point energy, the faster it comes. Humanity didn't just fight it, you suppressed us." Elias turned, his face older than ever. "Yes, that was the part I couldn't tell you until you were ready. The Hollow feeds on advancement. It feeds on the hubris of Type II civilizations. The peace we gave you, the erasing of our name, it wasn't just to hide. We actively suppressed your technological development. We sabotaged your warp drives to keep them slow. We manipulated your politics to keep you content within your borders. We kept you as children because children are quiet, and silence keeps the monsters away. It was a betrayal of the highest order, yet it was the ultimate act of protection. Humanity had played the role of the strict parent, stunting the growth of the galaxy to prevent it from attracting the predator. But now, Elias said, looking at the massive fleet assembled outside, a fleet bristling with forbidden energies, "We have broken the silence together. We have lit a bonfire in the dark forest. There is no going back. We can no longer hide. We must kill the wolf." The final battle was not a tactical engagement. It was a cosmic event. The Hollow arrived not as a fleet, but as a horizon, a wall of nothingness that spanned light years. The Concordat fleets, bolstered by human engineering, fired salvos that turned the void into a blinding sheet of white fire. Krell warships rammed into the dark geometry, detonating antimatter charges. Orodian psychic choirs screamed mental static to disrupt the Hollow's hive mind. And at the center, the human armada, the battered, gray remnants of the ancient guardians, formed a wedge. They weren't trying to defeat the Hollow through attrition. They were aiming for the source. The twist revealed itself fully. The Hollow was anchored to the supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy. It was using the singularity as a tether. To sever it, something had to go inside. "We can't shoot it," Elias broadcasted to the entire fleet. His voice was calm, the professional calm of a man who had accepted his fate 10,000 years ago. "The tether must be broken from the event horizon. We have to destabilize the singularity." "That is suicide," Vrex shouted over the comms. "It will pull the entire fleet in." "Not the entire fleet," Elias corrected. "Just the heavy mass, just us." The realization washed over the galaxy. Humanity wasn't planning to win and live. They were planning to win and leave. The erasure was about to become literal. They were going to fly their entire remaining civilization, every world ship, every dreadnought, every station into the black hole to create the critical mass needed to collapse the bridge. "You cannot do this," Alara cried out. "We just found you, we just learned your name." "And now you must remember it," Elias replied. "This is the burden of the firstborn. We make room for the younger siblings. We clear the board. Listen to me, Galaxy. You have the tools now. You have the courage. You don't need us to hold the door anymore. You are the door. Keep it closed." The cinematic spectacle of the final moments was etched into the optical sensors of every ship in the Concordat. The human fleet, thousands of gray monoliths, turned their engines to maximum burn. They didn't retreat. They charged. Not at the enemy, but through them, dragging the Hollow's tendrils with them into the gravitational maw of the galactic core. As they crossed the event horizon, time dilated. For the onlookers, the humans seemed to freeze in a moment of eternal heroism, their ships suspended in amber light, forever falling, forever fighting. Then a flash of impossible light, a quasar burst that outshone the galaxy, and the tether snapped. The Hollow shrieked, a psychic scream felt by every living soul, and dissolved into mist. The darkness retreated. The stars returned. But the gray ships were gone. The aftermath was a scene of haunting beauty. The High Synod was silent, but it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of mourning. Vrex stood at the viewport, looking at the empty space where the Terra Eterna had been. The name of humanity had been erased once by choice. Now it was erased by sacrifice, but the nature of the erasure had changed. It was no longer a void in the archives. It was a hallowed space, a sacred chapter that would be read to every hatchling, every larva, every child for the rest of time. In the final scene, a statue was unveiled in the center of the Synod. It was not gold or crystal. It was made of simple, scarred gray metal, salvaged from the debris of the battle. It depicted a human, helmet under one arm, looking up at the stars with that same weary, infinite sadness. The plaque beneath it did not list victories or kill counts. It did not list the names of the dead, for there were too many. It bore a single inscription, written in the high Gothic of the Saviors. "They stood in the rain so we could see the sun. They were the monster in the dark so we could be the children of the light. And when the dawn finally came, they were gone. Remember the name." The camera pulls back slowly, leaving the statue, leaving the station, leaving the star system, drifting further and further out until the galaxy is just a spiral of light in the vast cosmic dark. But the dark is no longer terrifying. It is quiet. It is safe. Because somewhere in that dark, even if only in memory, the Guardians are watching. And the galaxy, for the first time in eons, did not weep from fear. It wept from love. And the name of humanity echoed in the silence, louder than any star.